Dandava pranams, good morning to everyone. We're going to continue the reading of Sri Caitanya-caritāmṛta, Madhya-līlā, chapter 6, the liberation of Sarvabhauma Bhattācārya. This is a very long chapter, by the way. Do you know what's about? Have you heard a little bit about that? So Mahaprabhu was in Sarvabhauma's Bhattacārya's house, and he wanted Mahaprabhu to hear the Vedanta Sutra explanation from him. And for 7 days, this happens in 7 days. And the Lord was silent for 7 days. And then Sarvabhauma Bhattacārya asked him, why are you silent? So the discussion happened. He was an impersonalist, Sarvabhauma Bhattacārya. And it says here that because of his silence, the Bhattacārya asked him whether he was understanding the Vedanta philosophy. And the Lord replied, Sir, I can understand Vedanta philosophy very clearly, but I cannot understand your explanations. So, Mahaprabhu now we have been reading Mahaprabhu's description, the real description to defeat him, basically. So, we are in text 152. 152. Are you going to follow the...
I text 157.
Oh, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, but I'm just going to back a little bit.
Okay.
Very good. You are attentive. He's listening attentively. 152. So I'm here with Krishna Gopal Prabhu from Colombia. Rasamayi Pandita. And Devananda Prabhu is sitting over there in front. And we're here with Sri Guru Gauranga Ratha Giridhar Ju Ki Jai. Maybe you can give darshan to those who are listening. And please forgive my pronunciation. I'm going to try my best. So, Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Sri Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Sri Caitanya-caritāmṛta ki Jai Śrīla Kṛṣṇadāsa Kavirāja Gosvāmī Prabhu ki Jai Śrīla A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ki Jai Śrīla Gurudev ki Jai. So Mahaprabhu continues. Sadaishvarya Purnananda Vigraha Yanhara Hena Bhagavane Tumikaha Nirakara. Are you describing as formless that supreme personality of Godhead whose transcendental form is complete with 6 transcendental opulences? Swabhavikatina Sakti Se Jai Brahmahaya Nishaktika-caritāmṛta Karaha Nishchaya. The Supreme Personality of Godhead has 3 primary potencies. Are you trying to ascertain that he has no potencies? And then the Lord continues explaining Vishnu Shakti Parapokta Kshetra Yakya Tata Para Avidya Karma Samyanya Tritiya Saktir Ishyate. The internal potency of the Supreme Lord, Vishnu, is spiritual, as verified by the Shastras. There is another spiritual potency known as Kshetra Gya, or the living entity. The third potency, which is known as nescience, makes the entity godless and fills him with fruitive activity. Yaya Kshetra Gya Saktisha vestita nipa sarvaga sansara tapanakilan avapnoti atra santatan. O king, the Kshetragya Shakti is a living entity. Although he has the facility to live in either the material or spiritual world, he suffers the threefold miseries of material existence because he is influenced by the avidya, nescience potency, which covers his constitutional position. Tayatiro hitat vacha sakti kshetragya samnita sarvabhuteshu bhupala taratamyena vartate. This living entity covered by the influence of nescience exists in different forms in the material condition. O king, he is thus proportionately freed from the influence of material energy to greater or lesser degrees. Hladini sandini sambit tyai eka sarva sanraye hlada tapa kari misra tuajino guna varjite. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is Satchit Ananda Vigraha. This means that he originally has three potencies: the pleasure potency, the potency of eternality, and the potency of knowledge. Together, these are called the Chit potency, and they are present in full in the Supreme Lord. For the living entities who are part and parcel of the Lord, the pleasure potency in the material world is sometimes displeasing and sometimes mixed. This is not the case with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because he is not under the influence of the material energy or its modes. This is a quotation from the Vishnu Purana. Sachidananda Maya Haya Ispara Swarupa Tina Amse Chit Shakti Haya Tina Rupa. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, in his original form, is full of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. The spiritual potency in these three portions, Satchit, and Ananda, assumes three different forms. Purport. According to the Vedic verdict of all Vedic literature, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the living entity, and the illusory energy, this material world, constitute the subject matter of knowledge. Everyone should try to understand the relationship between them. First of all, one should try to understand the nature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. From the Shastras, we understand that the nature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the sum total of eternity, bliss, and knowledge, as stated in verse 154. Vishnu Shakti Para Prokta. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is a reservoir of all potencies, and his potencies are all spiritual. Anandam Damse Hladini, Shat Amse Sandini, Shid Amse Sambit, Jare Gyana Korimani. The three potencies of the spiritual potency are called Hladini, the bliss portion, Sandini, the eternity portion, and Sambit, the knowledge portion. We accept knowledge of this as full knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Purport. To acquire knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one must take shelter of the Sambit potency of the Supreme Lord. Antarangas Chit Shakti Tatashta Jiva Shakti Bahiranga Maya Tine Kore Prema Bhakti. The spiritual potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead also appears in three phases: internal, marginal, and external. These are all engaged in his devotional service in love. Purport. The spiritual potency of the Lord is manifested in three phases: the internal or spiritual potency, the marginal potency, which is the living entities, and the external potency, Jai Śrīla Gurudev. Jai Gurudev. Jai. Sorry, I'm going to read again. The spiritual potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead also appears in three phases: internal, marginal, and external. These are all engaged in his devotional service in love. Purport: the spiritual potency of the Lord is manifested in three phases: the internal or spiritual potency, the marginal potency, which is the living entities, and the external potency, known as Maya Shakti. We must understand that in each of these three phases, the original spiritual potencies of pleasure, eternity, and knowledge remains intact. When the potencies of spiritual pleasure and knowledge are both bestowed upon the conditioned souls, the conditioned souls can escape the clutches of the external potency, Maya, which acts as a cover obscuring one's spiritual identity. When freed, the living entity awakens to Krishna consciousness and engages in devotional service with love and affection. Sat Vidha Aisvarya Prabhurachit Shakti Vilasa Hena Shakti Nahimana Parama Shahasa. In his spiritual potency, the Supreme Lord enjoys 6 kinds of opulence. You do not accept this spiritual potency, and this is due to your great impudence. So this is Mahaprabhu speaking to Sarvabhauma Bhattācārya. And I repeat this. He's telling him, in his spiritual potency, the Supreme Lord enjoys his 6 kinds of opulence. You do not accept this spiritual potency, and this is due to your great impudence. Purport: the Supreme Personality of Godhead is full with 6 opulences. All these potencies are on the transcendental platform. To understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead as impersonal and devoid of potency is to go completely against Vedic information. Maya Disha Maya Vasha Isvare Jive Veda Hena Jive Isvara Saha Kahata Aveda. The Lord is the master of the potencies, and the living entity is a servant of them. That is the difference between the Lord and the living entity. However, you declare that the Lord and the living entities are one and the same. Purport: the Supreme Personality of Godhead is by nature the master of all potencies. By nature, the living entity, being infinitesimal, are always under the influence of the Lord's potencies. According to the Mundaka Upanishad, there is a very long sloka, but I'm going to skip that. The Mukunda Upanishad completely distinguishes the Lord from the living entities. The living entity is subjected to the reactions of fruitive activity, whereas the Lord simply witnesses such activity and bestows the results. According to the living entity's desires, he is wandering from one body to another and from one planet to another under the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Paramatma. However, when the living entity comes to his senses by the mercy of the Lord, he is awarded devotional service. Thus, he is saved from the clutches of Maya. At such a time, he can see his eternal friend, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and become free from all lamentation and hankering. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 18.54, where the Lord says, Brahma Bhuta Prasanatma na sochati na kanshati. Do you know the meaning of that verse?
I don't know that verse, no.
One who is transcendentally situated at once realizes the Supreme Brahman. He never laments, nor desires to have anything. Thus, it is definitely proved that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the master of all potencies, and that the living entities are always subjected to these potencies. That is the difference between Maya-disha and Maya-vasa. Gita Sastra Jiva Rupe Shakti Kori Mane Hena Jive Vedakara Isvarera Sane. In Bhagavad Gita, the living entity is established as the marginal potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yet, you say that the living entity is completely different from the Lord. Purport. The Brahma Sutra states that according to the principle of Shakti Mator, Aveda, the living entity is simultaneously one with and different from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Qualitatively, the living entity and the Supreme Lord are one, but in quantity they are different. According to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's philosophy, what is that? What is Mahaprabhu's philosophy? Come on. Achintya Veda Tattva. The living entity and the Supreme Lord are accepted as one and different at the same time. Bhumir Apo Nalo Vayu Kam Mano Budir Evacha Ahankara Itiyam Me Bina Praktir Astadha. Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego are my eightfold separate energies. Apareyam itas tua anjam prakritim vidhi me param jiva putan maha baho yayedam daryate yagat. Besides these inferior energies, which are material, there is another energy, a spiritual energy, and this is the living being, Almighty Armed One. The entire material world is sustained by the living entities. It's very windy. Could you please call Jagadishwar also to get ready and to check the marquee, please? That verse is from Bhagavad Gita 7.45. Isvarera Sri Vigraha Sachidananda Kara Se Vigrahe Koho Sattva Gunera Vikara. The transcendental form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is complete in eternity, cognizance, and bliss. However, you describe this transcendental form as a product of material goodness. Si Vigraha Jena Mane Seita Prasandi Adrishya Asprishya Sei Haya Yamadandi. One who does not accept the transcendental form of the Lord is certainly an agnostic. Such a person should be neither seen nor touched. Indeed, he is subject to be punished by Yamaraj. Purport. According to Vedic instructions, the Supreme Personality of Godhead has his eternal transcendental form, which is always blissful and full of knowledge. Impersonalists think that material refers to the forms within our experience, and that spiritual refers to an absence of form. However, one should know that beyond this material nature is another nature, which is spiritual. Just as there are material forms in this material world, there are spiritual forms in the spiritual world. This is confirmed by all Vedic literature. The spiritual forms in the transcendental world have nothing to do with the negative conception of formlessness. The conclusion is that a person is an agnostic when he does not agree to worship the transcendental form of the Lord. Actually, at the present moment, all systems of religion deny the worship of the form of the Lord due to ignorance of his transcendental form. The first-class materialists, the Mayavadis, imagine 5 specific forms of the Lord, but when they try to equate the worship of such imaginary forms with bhakti, they are immediately condemned. Lord Sri Krishna confirms this in Bhagavad Gita 7.15, where he says, Namam duskritino muda prapadyante naradamaha. Bereft of real knowledge due to agnosticism, the Mayavadi philosophers should not even be seen by the devotees of the Lord, nor touched, because those philosophers are liable to be punished by Yamaraj, the superintendent demigod who judges the activities of sinful men. The Mayavadi agnostics wander within this universe in different species of life due to their non-devotional activities. Such living entities are subjected to the punishments of Yamaraj. Only the devotees who are always engaged in the service of the Lord are exempt from the jurisdiction of Yamaraj. So we read here one last verse for today. Vedana maniya bauddha hajata nastika vedasraya nastikya vada bauddhake adhika. The Buddhists do not recognize the authority of the Vedas. Therefore, they are considered agnostics. However, those who have taken shelter of the Vedic scriptures yet preach agnosticism in accordance with the Mayavada philosophy are certainly more dangerous than the Buddhists. Purport. Although the Buddhists are directly opposed to Vaishnava philosophy, it can easily be understood the Sankarists are more dangerous because they accept the authority of the Vedas, yet act contrary to Vedic instruction. Vedasraya Nastikya Vada means agnosticism under the shelter of Vedic culture, and refers to the monist philosophy of the Mayavadis. Lord Buddha abandoned the authority of the Vedic literature and therefore rejected the ritualistic ceremonies and sacrifices recommended in the Vedas. His nirvana philosophy means stopping all material activities. Lord Buddha did not recognize the presence of transcendental forms of unspiritual activities beyond the material world. He simply described voidism beyond this material existence. The Mayavadi philosophers offer lip service to Vedic authority but try to escape the Vedic ritualistic ceremonies. They concoct some idea of a transcendental position and call themselves Narayana or God. However, God's position is completely different from their concoction. Such Mayavadi philosophers consider themselves above the influence of karma kanda, fruitic activities, and their reactions. For them, the spiritual world is equated with the Buddhist voidism. Therefore, is very little difference between impersonalism and voidism. Voidism can be directly understood, but the impersonalism enunciated by Mayavadi philosophers is not very easily understandable. Of course, Mayavadi philosophers accept a spiritual existence, but they do not know about the spiritual world and spiritual beings. According to Srimad Bhagavatam 10.232, the intelligence of the Mayavadis is not purified. Therefore, even though they practice austerities for self-realization, they cannot remain within the impersonal Brahmayoti. Consequently, they fall down again into this material world. The Mayavadi's conception of a spiritual existence is almost identical to negation of material existence. The Mayavadis believe that there is nothing positive in a spiritual life. As a result, they cannot understand devotional service or the worship of the Supreme Person, Satchit Ananda Vigraha. The Mayavadi philosophers consider deity worship in devotional service to be Pratibimba Vada, or the worship of a form that is the reflection of a false material form. Thus, the Lord's transcendental form, which is eternally blissful and full of knowledge, is unknown to Mayavadi philosophers. Although the term Bhagavan is explicitly described in Srimad Bhagavatam, they cannot understand it. Brahmeti Paramatmeti Bhagavan iti sabjate. The absolute truth is called Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. This is from Bhagavad Gita 1.2. The Mayavadis try to understand Brahman only, or at the most, Paramatma. However, they are unable to understand Bhagavan. Therefore, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, says, Maya paritra jnanana. Maya paritra jnanana. Because of the Mayavadi philosopher's temperament, real knowledge is taken from them. Because they cannot receive the mercy of the Lord, they will always be bewildered by his transcendental form. Impersonal philosophy destroys the three phases of knowledge, jnana, jnaya, and jnata. As soon as one speaks of knowledge, there must be a person who is the knower, the knowledge itself, and the object of knowledge. Mayavada philosophy combines these three categories. Therefore, the Mayavadis cannot understand how the spiritual potencies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead acts. Because of the poor fund of knowledge, they cannot understand the distinction in the spiritual world between knowledge, the knower, and the object of knowledge. Because of this, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu considers the Mayavadi philosophers more dangerous than the Buddhists. And we can stop here for today. It's a lot to digest, right? A lot to understand. Jai Sri Caitanya-caritāmṛta ki Jai, Śrīla Kṛṣṇadāsa Kavirāja Gosvāmī ki Jai. The marquee is going to fly away. We need to, Prabhu, you need to go and help. Go and help them sort out the marquee, please. Maybe Pandita can sing Hari Haraya Nama Krishna.
Hari Haraya Nama Krishna Yadavaya Namaha.
Hari Haraya Nama Krishna Yadavaya Namaha.
Yadavaya Madhavaya
Yadavaya Madhavaya Kesavaya Namaha.
Gopala Govinda Ram Sri Madhusudan.
Gopala Govinda Ram Sri Madhusudana.
Giridhari Gopinath Madhana Mohan.
Giridhari Gopinath Madhana Mohana.
Shri Chaitanya Nityananda Sri Advaita Chanda. Gadadhara Sivasari Gaurabhakta Vindam. Jairupa Sanatan Bhataraguna. Sijiva Gopala Bhattacārya Guna. Vichai Gosai Gori Charana
Parikara Shri Guru Gauranga Sundar Radha Devī ki
Jai.
Jami Pasla Bhakti Sundar Govinda Deva Gosvāmī Maharaj ki Jai. Jami Pasla Bhakti Bhakti Gosvāmī Maharaj ki Jai. Jami Pasla Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswatī Thakur ki Jai.
Jai.
Śrīla Guru Varga ki Jai. Brahmacārya Śrīla Haridas Thakur ki Jai.
Jai.
Jai Shri Caitanya Saraswat Mat ki Jai. Shri Caitanya Saraswat Mat London Chapter ki Jai. Shri Caitanya-caritāmṛta ki Jai. Shri Śrīla Kṛṣṇadāsa Kavirāja Gosvāmī Prabhu ki Jai.
Jai.
Śrīla Bhakti Swami Prabhupada ki Jai.
Jai.
Jai Shri Rupanuma Guru Varga ki Jai.
Jai.
Jai Shri Tulasi Devī Maharani Vrinda Devi ki Jai.
Jai.
Anati Koti Vaishnavrinda ki Jai.
Jai.
Shri Harinama Sankirtan ki Jai.
Jai.
Nitai Gaur Premanande.
Hri Bol. Jai Saraswati Devi ki Jai.
Jai